when you think about every time you spend time on Instagram, we say you're working for Instagram. If you don't share in the common vision, if you don't agree on the common vision, then you can't even raise $1. For instance, I don't think I can ever retire because I think there's just too much to do. And I'm enjoying.
By the way, how often do you talk with Satoshi? Saudi just gave him $50 million. I want to welcome Yat Siu. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
How are you doing? How's been lately?
Oh, very good. I just came from Hong Kong. We had one epic week with Hong Kong FinTech Week, ApeFest, Mochaverse Cruise. Basically, I think for that 1 week, Hong Kong was the Web3 capital of the world. You know, I was giving a poll. I was asking how many people came to Hong Kong for the first time just to be here. And it was something like 70 or 80% of the people who came for the festival. And it was great to see because it kind of not only just put Hong Kong on the map, but it also showed how Web3 as a community is global and connected. You know, it didn't matter where you're from. You all came together in one place. You had a good time. Everyone enjoyed themselves. And we're basically sharing in sort of the same feeling and sentiment about sort of what Web3 is all about property rights, about community, about shared growth. So it was great to see. And I think we'll hopefully have much more of that.
Yes, absolutely, indeed. What does it take to close a $50 million deal? It's about the product, the utility of the product, or is like outstanding communication out there?
So when it comes to the NEOM transaction, I think in general speaking, you know, first of all, I would say that it just demonstrates that the region itself obviously is very keen in the space. Obviously, UAE has been sort of more of the sort of earlier and forward in this. But now you can also see that NEOM, which is building the city of the future, has now embraced, from their perspective, what the future of technology would look like. And it's great to see that they also share in the view that Web3 is also the future in a sense. So that's why they're doing this. Now, what does it take to close any kind of deal? I don't think it matters whether it's 50 or 100 or 500 million. What matters is that when you're working with a strategic, that you share in a common vision. So if you don't share in the common vision, if you don't agree on the common vision, then you can't even raise $1, right? But if you share in the common vision, then you're able to raise the money. And if the scale of your ambition is great enough, and you can, of course, demonstrate that you can get there, then the sort of size of commitment and investment will also be similar. To be clear, in Saudi terms, 50 million is not a lot of money. So, you know, I wouldn't go out and say, wow, look at this. But it is impressive, given the fact that it is the bear market, given the fact that, you know, you don't normally get to see a lot of check sizes, I guess, recently. But also just a few, I think maybe a month before, with Mochaverse, we raised $20 million from a Hong Kong fund and some other friends as well. You know, it was CMCC. So I guess it just shows that there is money if you have shared vision and there is ambition. And you know, let's not forget that in Web3, today, I think the total market, which is mostly Bitcoin, but still, is $1.3 trillion, right? And, you know, over $100 billion just in DeFi is being exchanged. Never mind what happens in CeFi. So there is liquidity in the market. There is money in the space. And just this last 7 days, just take a look at what happened to NFT markets, right? It's like 35% more volume, right? I think over $125 million done in the week. You know, it's you know, it does show.
With Blur being the leader,
yeah,
right?
Blur being leader because of the way they do liquidity pooling. But the point just simply being that there is liquidity in the space. If you want to sell, you can sell. If you want to trade, if you want to exchange, if you want to invest, there are many projects out there that are still receiving investment. So I think it comes down to whether you have a shared purpose, a common goal, and whether you agree in this vision. And this, by the way, works for venture capital as well.
So do you see money as a tool? Like any other stuff, can you put money in front of knowledge or expertise? Or is just a matter of multiple pieces at the table that, you know, make the entire, you know, utility and give sense to that business opportunity?
So I see money as a means to an end, right? In the sense that money helps grow the ecosystem. I see money as a way that can sort of, you know, create more liquidity, sort of maybe exchanging of culture, of values. You know, for instance, the concept of trade, right, is really what brings cultures together. If it wasn't for trade, we wouldn't, in the early days, humanity wouldn't come together. How do we share culture? We share culture through trade, through here's my clothes, here's your clothes, here's my food, here's your food. But what is a way and the medium in which we can exchange that culture, which is really, if you think about it, exchanging your humanity and what you think is special. Like, why do we have Christmas? Why is there birthdays? What are all these sort of, rituals that we share with each other? When you go to Japan, you maybe have Shinto rituals. When you go to Europe, you have Christian rituals. When you're here in the Middle East, you might have Islamic rituals. But we share in these rituals and we share in their food and their culture. But the medium of exchange, to me, is what money did, especially when they changed money not from barter, but basically to a form of currency, right? In the earliest days, I think it was under Kublai Khan in China, they introduced money for the first time. And I remember, I guess, as a child, I was reading these stories. I think when Marco Polo first visited China, he was like, what is this money? Why are people willing to do this? Why are people willing to sort of exchange something non-physical, non-valuable for some kind of sort of, paper money at the time? And really the function of the money was to create an exchange of trust, right? This trust mechanism that I can now trade something more fluidly, more sort of more deliberately in a trusted manner. And with that, I can trade my knowledge and I can trade my expertise and I can trade my goods and my wares and my culture. And that is really, I think, how money has really served the world and continues to serve the world in that manner.
Absolutely, yes. What do you think you did so right with Animoca that you're so successful?
Well, I mean, I would never go out and say that we're so successful. I think the jury is still out there.
It's obvious, right?
I think there's still a lot of growth to go. But I would say, the big thing maybe that sort of led to our vision, and I think this comes down to everything that we think, so even before when we were a much smaller company, is we're trying to lead with impact and purpose. So meaning that we're hoping in what we build that we can make a big difference. That doesn't mean you succeed, right? It's always a struggle to get there. But if you have a vision that you think that this is the right thing to do, then maybe in due course you will succeed. But even if you don't, you'll still have tried to make a difference in the world. And so for us, this idea of digital property rights, this idea that we should own our virtual time, that we should own our digital time in which we spend so much of our life, in some cases, most of our life, that seemed to us the right thing to do. How we get there is the bigger question. 5 years ago, we started with gaming, but actually, it's really become bigger than that. But we didn't really know what that path would look like. And so we looked at all the ways in which we could expand in that. And so we said, okay, how do we make digital property rights really, really big? Well, okay, we can't do it ourselves. So that means we have to invest. So we invested in OpenSea or in Dapper Labs or in Wax or Decentraland, Axie Infinity, Sky Mavis as a company, and all these businesses in the early days, and acquired Sandbox. We weren't thinking specifically that these were going to be big, big returns. Of course, we hoped they would be successful. We were more thinking about how can they help build this ecosystem, this vision that we had. And remember, all these companies were very small. So we're not talking about big checks. I mean, they were classic angel investing style checks. I remember the OpenSea round, the entire OpenSea round was $2 million. We led the Axie Infinity round. It was $800,000, the whole round, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was 2018, 2019 times. Those were different. But again, because we wanted to see this future happen, we just invested and then we helped build and we constructed to get to the point where it was. Also, I would say we were willing to go for a long time. So we were not thinking what happens in 2 years or 3 years. From our lens, because we also invested on a balance sheet, we thought of this as like the early internet. So we knew that this could take maybe 10 or 20 years. And if it takes 10 or 20 years, then it doesn't matter what you invest now, as in you're helping it build, because you can wait. And that, the market, and I think this is just the nature of the world we are in today, and the nature of technology, and the nature of COVID, which I think also accelerated it, made the industry move faster than perhaps we expected. But that it was going to happen, to us, was inevitable.
But from the business perspective, is not a little bit too long, to think in moves in 10 to 20 years? I mean, monetization-wise.
I don't think so. I mean, and when you think from the basic fundamental investments, like real estate, the real estate plan that you get on a place isn't the next 2 years. It's decades. I mean, we're in Dubai. The plan for Dubai wasn't what happens in the next 2 years. The plan for Dubai was what happens in decades. I think of Dubai and UAE really generally as a great example of the metaverse, because literally this area was just sand, right? And now it's services, it's human capital, and in some ways it's like the real sandbox. And that's one of the reasons why also, by the way, I think we had shared a lot of common ground with NEOM. Because what is NEOM? NEOM is a future vision of an amazing and incredible sort of construction of this new sort of, I guess you could officially call it special economic zone, but it's basically like building a new country. And also there is nothing there for the time being.
They are building a society which is coming in 5 to 10 years.
Actually, yes, it starts in 5 to 10 years, but actually it will be decades to build out. Exactly. And so that's what I'm saying. If you want to build a really grand vision, you're not going to build a grand vision when you think of the next 2 to 3 years. You can support the grand vision, but you're not going to be sort of being able to shape it in 2-3 years. But if you have a long-term horizon, you can do so. And I think you look at all the last sort of decades of countries and nations that have transformed out of nothing. South Korea. People forget that 40 years ago, South Korea was poorer than North Korea. Or China, for instance. People might not remember that China was one of the poorest nations literally just 3 decades ago. And now it is, second largest economy in the world, for instance. These did not come from a vision of the next 2 or 3 years or even 5 years. These came with an ambition to grow and scale a society over decades. And when we think of blockchain and the notion of digital property rights, we always compare them to countries. I mean, what is Ethereum, for instance? What is Bitcoin? To us, they are nations. The people who exist in them don't exist in them because of pure utility. They have a culture in it. They have a lifestyle with it. They have a belief in it, in a faith in the system of a better future. And to us, that's a foundation of a kind of cultural national identity.
So beautiful, indeed. I mean, like, your vision is just outstanding. Now I can literally understand why you're so successful, because with this kind of thinking, definitely that the scale that you build is it's the largest one, and of course the success is just a matter of part of the game
and patience.
Definitely.
Yes.
So what excites you now the most, like after you've seen all this success in gaming and metaverse? Literally you build everything what's out there in the market in terms of the most successful projects you're literally behind. Like, what's hot for you right now?
Well, first of all, I would argue we're still very early, right? There's an interesting chart that compared how the internet adoption back in the early 99 and 2000, 2001 is very similar to the Web3 adoption we see today in terms of relative scale. And I think that's true, meaning that, we have about 5 billion people online plus, and we have literally just tens of millions of people in Web3. So, there's still a big growth path to happen. And so that's why, and to me, what's exciting is not what we've achieved so far, but what will come, because this will be transformative to the entire world. And also what happens when we even just bring hundreds of millions of new people in, never mind the billions, right? So, but what are these triggers? Well, obviously gaming is still something we're super excited on. We have over 140 investments in gaming and continuing to grow. And this region, by the way, is a very exciting one because it's
Are you still
young.
looking in gaming?
We are still looking at gaming. Yeah. We're making investments. But one of the things that's interesting is that many of the gaming investments we've done in the last 2 or 3 years are now about to come out.
Yes.
Right. I mean, Phantom Galaxies is launching their basically sort of release beta, I think. Yeah, actually this month, for instance. Rec League just came out recently, but with the Web2 game version, basically that'll be next year. Of course, Sandbox is still running their alphas. And, Gamey, for instance, very exciting on the hyper casual. I mean, they are, for instance, the largest gaming platform on Telegram, for instance. Most people don't know that yet. And that platform now, at the time when gaming became really big on Telegram, Telegram didn't really have a blockchain strategy because of everything that happened. And now Ton is back, right? And all this conversation about Telegram basically having a wallet and basically going into blockchain in a very, very decisive manner is very beneficial for projects like Gamey that are basically on blockchain as well and are building essentially on-chain gaming in a casual sense. So all these things are beginning to form, beginning to happen. And I would argue that the bear market was actually very good, because in a bull market, sometimes what happens is you don't focus on the product because there's just sometimes too much money around. But then when there's a bear market, all the people who are there for the wrong reasons, they leave. And also, sometimes they just get flushed out, like most recently what happened with Three Arrows and with SPF. Basically, to me, this is the closing of a bad chapter. But the people who continue to build, people like us, or people, like Sandbox, or the Yuga Labs guys, or Gamey, or all
real
these ones,
builders out there.
they're builders. They're real builders out
Yeah.
there. Will continue to build regardless of bull or bear, and they will be successful because they share in that vision. The other thing that I think has been missing in the industry, and so we've been sort of trying to plug that hole, and I think beginning to do that, is in education. So when you think about, again, we think of everything in forms of meta-nations. So in meta-nations, in general nations, one of the most important aspects is education, right? How do you not just teach people about Web3, but how do you sort of incorporate those educators in the space, because they're the ones who bring and build the culture that you're in. And so we started focusing a lot on education with Open Campus, as well as with TinyTap, which is also an acquisition we did actually last year to help basically push the education narrative into Web3. So, between gaming, the metaverse, and education, we think these are super exciting areas. Teachers today are making money with Web3. They're creating curriculums and they're earning income, and then they can sell the curriculum that they've built basically to other people, almost like a capital asset. So it basically means that you can take the intellectual property that teachers have created and now kind of almost turn them into musicians and artists, right? Like we normally only think of artists and musicians as having IP, right? But actually teachers make probably the most IP out there. When you think about when you go to YouTube, YouTube is the largest learning platform in the world. We might think of it as an entertainment platform. Yes, it's entertaining, but actually you go there to learn, whether you learn about guitar, or whether you learn about a country, or whether you learn about a culture, whether you learn about philosophy, right? You go on YouTube to learn that. All of that stuff can now also become intellectual property through Web3.
I think it's the most used platform in terms of how to.
Correct. That's right. Exactly.
Like anytime when you have your question starting how to do that, you just immediately go to YouTube.
Correct.
And that's crazy. Of course, YouTube is for creators. It's such a wonderful tool.
It is, but it is a Web2 platform, meaning that the benefits actually don't accrue mostly to the creators. They accrue mostly to the platform. And that's exactly why Web3 is so powerful. Because actually what happens in a Web3 version of that is that the creators will get the majority of the value because they're the ones who create most of it. I mean, remember, in any of those Web2 platforms, if the creators and the users don't exist, then the platform is worth nothing. So you need to rebalance the value.
When we think about creators, like when you started, and if you are looking at you right now, where you are with everything what you do, like what do you think you didn't have at the starting point and you have acquired along the road to be able to manage everything at this scale? Like what's that skill that you develop in time?
So I generally think that our own history and our own experiences back when you were even a child actually shapes who you are today in terms of how you think of things, how you approach matters, how you build businesses. So for instance, some of the way that I think about the world came from the fact that I grew up in Europe. I grew up in Austria, but I grew up in Austria in the 70s and 80s. So that was a long time ago. And Europe was a different place. It was a divided continent in the sense that you had Eastern and Western Europe. And my mom was an artist. She was a singer and then opera director. So I was exposed to the world of, I guess, arts and culture that way. I myself also studied music. And she was working in the eastern side of Germany at one point of her career, which was in East Berlin at the Komische Oper. And so when I would cross over to that world, I would see a totally different one. And I think it's hard for, of course, younger people to understand that you would walk in and it was like walking into a scene of 1984, except it was real. You would walk in and you would see people not having food, or, you go to the supermarket and there was literally cans spread out 1 meter apart to make it fill up because there was supply issues because of the way that, the economy didn't work in those communist countries. And then, after that, when I went to work and then study in the US and eventually to Hong Kong, I experienced ultra-capitalism, like capitalism to the extreme. On one hand, I saw what capitalism did for the countries. It created motivation and entrepreneurship and activity because money was the motivator, you could say. But I also saw the problems it created in terms of shareholder capitalism. I saw how it created inequity. I saw how concentration of capital ended up creating a lot of inequality and injustices. So all these things shape the way that, the way that I grew up, shaped the way that we think today about Web3 and why we're so attracted to it. Which, by the way, I think is one of the reasons why Web3 is not attractive for certain people who believe in their own way of the way that they were brought up, in their own belief systems. For instance, if you believe in concentration of power, right, then Web3 is not so attractive to you, because actually Web3 is all about sort of decentralization. It's all about distribution of power. It's all about sort of more equity. It's ownership. But the point of ownership is that while there can be a sort of unequal distribution of ownership, this decentralization only works if there is a reasonable distribution across the board. Imagine if Bitcoin was controlled by one tycoon or one nation or one company, and they had the majority of the mining power, for instance. The value of Bitcoin would be, go to zero, for instance, right? Or if Ethereum was not basically distributed the way that it was, if there was only maybe 20 or 30 nodes, for instance.
By the way, how often do you talk with Satoshi?
I do not talk to Satoshi. I do not know who he is, and I think I think this would be the universal thing. It would be a great honor if I had a chance, but no, I do not know Satoshi. Yes.
What do you think will happen if you just, open a camera at one point and say, "Hello, guys, this is it"? Like, what will be the impact in the industry?
In some ways, I hope he never does that.
Do you think it's the backbone of this entire narrative behind Bitcoin?
So I don't know that
this unknown creator.
No, I don't think so. No, I think maybe in the beginning it was, when it was very Bitcoin focused, maybe. But I think today the narrative of decentralization, the narrative of digital property rights, the idea that we have to have sovereign ownership over our data and our identity, is much bigger than Satoshi. And my reading of Satoshi, in the sense that it's a speculation, is that I think that's what he would have wanted as well, right? That you want the idea to be bigger than himself. I don't think, he doesn't, at least in the initial, sort of strike me as a person who would sort of be very egocentric about this. I think the vision has to be larger. At least that's how I would like to think of it. But also now it is bigger than that. So if Satoshi does show up, suddenly, then first of all, I think there'll be a lot of skepticism. But assuming that, we all agree because he moves the right wallets, I think it would be, for most of us, that's great. But
it will instantly become number one person in the world?
He would probably become sort of clearly very famous. But I actually think in some ways it does destroy the mysticism. It does remove the aura of Satoshi. And so I think he's more powerful being where he is right now than, and I think this is the point about how we build stories as humans. The storytelling is the more powerful part. The fact that we create sort of our own ideas and impressions in our mind that are each to our own, by the way, right, is actually what creates this incredible, powerful image of our interpretation that speaks mostly to us. So we like to imagine that Satoshi has more in common with us than we do, for instance. And that actually, I think, has power in itself. And perhaps if Satoshi was still alive, which we don't know, he might understand that. Because if he actually did come out, I think he would realize that. So I'm assuming that he is probably, if he's still around, not ever going to come out, because I think he cares about the industry and the growth of that industry. And so I think the mysticism and the idealism is best kept alive with us never finding out who he truly is.
Do you think everything what you're doing right now, it's a internal conversation with your child version? Like everything what you wanted, as you mentioned that you come out from family of artists, right? So that explains everything, your passion for NFTs and everything. Do you think is that much well rooted with your childhood?
I think my childhood definitely had an influencing impact for sure. But I don't know that that's the only thing. For instance, I had to work in the US. I had to come to Hong Kong to witness the problems of capitalism too, right? Hong Kong, up until recently, was always considered one of the freest economies in the world. It's still either number one or number two. It is, you could say in its earliest days, Milton Friedman's dream society. But Hong Kong also, in the early days when I first came to Hong Kong, did not have any social security. It had no safety nets, which is why you would still have 70 or 80-year-old people dragging trash across the street because they didn't have a pension system. Because in the early form of Hong Kong, that's not it, right? You make your money and you live on your money. Low taxes, right? Of course, but also relatively low social security. You just kind of build and do what you need to do. And I think as time went on, the society matured, people started saying, wait, actually, that's a problem. Because at the end of the day, that kind of erodes some of the human empathy and some of the sort of national cultural identity we want to build with upon each other. But these are things that needed developing. And so when I saw that, I saw the benefits that capitalism created in terms of the intensity, in terms of the deal making, in terms of the ambition and the hunger and the growth and the entrepreneurship. But I also saw the problems it generated. When you walk on the street, it's, I guess, a little bit how people might feel lately about San Francisco for different reasons. Suddenly it becomes normal to see an old person drag trash from the street, right? I mean, you can't imagine this in Europe, for instance. This would be considered sort of inhumane, and it would be something without respect and dignity. But, in Hong Kong, often people just walk by because it's just part of a normal scene, for instance.
What's that big difference that you've seen between the US and in China in terms of capitalism? Like when you saw that, you said, "Oh, that's totally something
it's totally different." So, by the way, I would like to distinguish between sort of the capitalist ideal in Hong Kong and China is different, right? So in China, the thing that has been really pushed recently is what they describe as common prosperity, which is a very, which can be a tricky word.
That indeed is a tricky one.
It's a tricky word because what is common prosperity?
Exactly.
Is that socialism disguised in some element of that? But I think the main, and I think when we look at the way that society reacted to COVID, I think it's a good way to sort of explain the differences between, I guess, the way people view capitalism in the US versus the way people view capitalism in China. So at the end of the day, in China, because of its education, probably because of its Confucianist roots and all the backgrounds around it, there is still a very strong sense of common duty, right? This idea that and by the way, this is a fairly common idea also in Asia. You have this in Japan and Korea as well, and in sort of greater China. This sort of idea also of filial piety, that you basically sort of have a respect to your elders, and also that you basically agree and accept that what you do is for the common good of the people around you, even if you don't know them, right? So, for instance, when there is a sort of a big problem, for instance, earthquakes somewhere around China, then there's an expectation that the nation gives donations, that we give charity support, and some may be cynical about it and say, "Oh, you're only doing it because you want to show that you're supportive," but it's part of the culture. It's part of the expectation that you do this. For instance,
what side do you think will be like more close to adopt Metaverse faster?
Right. Yeah. Well, maybe maybe just to finish off the difference about the US. No problem. Was that in the US it's a much more individualistic approach on capitalism, right? It's much more about sort of what is in it for me, and the whole sort of belief, which is very much sort of at root from sort of Adam Smith's sort of thinking about, I guess, how we think about sort of capitalism is that if as long as I think of things that are in my own benefit, then and it's a competitive environment, and we will all strive for something that's better for society broadly, right? But what then happens, of course, as you saw with COVID, is that while in China, everyone was still willing to wear masks and still willing to sort of follow the general instruction of, don't go out, and, at very great personal expense in terms of freedom and liberties. In the US, for instance, people would not accept that type of sort of restriction on your freedom and liberty because of the more individualistic perspective, right? So, and I think the view of capitalism is also similar in the sense that capitalism in America is a more individualistic pursuit, whereas capitalism in, let's say, parts of Asia and China has a more sort of common pursuit, shall we say. That's not to say that people don't want to become wealthy, but it is to say that there is an expectation from society that you have to sort of either give back or do something that contributes broadly to the environment, to the setup, which also explains why, for instance, capitalist abuses in China are treated very, very differently and much more aggressively than you would say in the US. And I would say neither side necessarily agrees with each other's perspectives on this one, right? That's why I think there's a difference there. And this to me comes down to philosophical, underlying philosophical differences between how we think of society and nation governing.
The Americans actually, they want to see something in a short version for themselves at the starting point, and then they can think at the larger scale. Otherwise, if it's not like an individual level, the benefit coming right away.
Well, the American perspective, which by the way I don't necessarily think is wrong, right? Is that
this is not bad or right. It's just a matter
an individualistic
of,
one, because at its core it comes down to your personal freedom and liberties. In other words, your liberties and your freedom are are your own, and the state and the government technically exists to defend your liberties. And so therefore I do what I need to do as long as I follow the rules, of course. And you're here because you serve me, right? It's actually a difference. It feels like a nuance, but it is a fairly big difference in terms of how you think about things. So that means that some people will refuse to wear masks because it is their personal rights and liberties that they feel are exposed, even if it may be harmful potentially to some extent. Because other people might get sick or something. They're like, well, this is my right. This is what I should be entitled to do. This is my sense of individualism, which it would not be okay in other countries, but in parts of the US it's completely accepted. And so I think that's and there's a disagreement, by the way, within America as well about sort of what you can and cannot do with that thinking, which I think is also at root. I think America itself has a little bit of a conflict right now in terms of even how you think about capitalism, right? When you think between the sort of boundaries between sort of, I guess, the Republican and the Democratic Party, they have very different approaches and views around sort of, wealth distribution and capitalist approaches, which is one of the reasons why I think America is somewhat in conflict with itself, because the original idea of capitalism, which was really an American one, was a predominant narrative. And they used to have a common approach, which at this point, I don't think is true anymore.
Even though lately all candidates for the presidential, they became crypto friendly suddenly.
Well, I don't know. I can't call the Democratic side crypto friendly, right? So the Republican side, yes.
At least for the public, they are there all the time. They put
the one thing I do very much appreciate about the Web3 crypto communities is that we are perennial optimists, right? Just a few days ago, just yesterday, there was a Simpson episode which talked about NFTs.
Yeah.
It was good fun, right?
Yeah.
I saw it, and it was.
Isn't it crazy this stuff with the Simpsons?
I know
it's put great. Out there some stuff that's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, and so. But the people who don't like crypto are like, yeah, look, they're making fun of it. It's a parody, and all NFTs go to zero, and everything in Web3 and in NFT world. Look, the Simpsons, we're so back. It's like the whole world will know about NFTs. Let's go, right? And it's the same story, right? It's the same episode viewed by different people who decide to take different perspectives of the same video, which is what we do with everything, right? So again, I do agree that it just brings NFTs more to mainstream. I don't personally care if it's a parody or if it has some sort of, if it may be viewed negatively by some people, because it is becoming, more aware. But it is also true that you take what you want from it, right? And so people in Web3 will look at the positives, and people who don't like Web3 will look at the negatives, right? That's just normal.
Where do you see Metaverse, like in a time frame, like literally a place where we will spend at least 2-3 hours per day there?
So I think the way that we should think of the Metaverse is how much time we spend online. So for me, the way that we think of the Metaverse began 30, 40 years ago when you first went online on CompuServe and then on the internet. And today, depending which country you're in, you're spending between 6 to 9 hours a day online. So when you think about how many hours you're awake, for some of us, that's most of our time. And I don't mean Metaverse like playing games. I mean when you're on Instagram, when you're on social media, when you're writing emails, all those to me is online time. Because every time you're spending time online, you're generating something of value in the online spectrum. The question becomes, do you share in the value, or is that value something that belongs to someone else? And so when you think about every time you spend time on Instagram, we say you're working for Instagram because you're sharing a photo. And when you're sharing a photo, you're giving thought Does a photo look good? Will my followers like it? How many likes will I get? Is it going to be popular? And that's all great, because maybe you get 100 likes, maybe you get 1,000 likes. Maybe if you're really popular, you get 100,000 likes. But who benefits from the likes? And the answer is the platform. Yes, you get a pat on the back and it looks good and you can make maybe some benefit from it too. But 90% of that value does not belong to you, it belongs to the platform, because it can always take it away from you. And the platform can leverage the user to go somewhere else. You're engaging for use on the platform. You're not engaging for use to you as an individual. If you left Instagram, would those followers follow you? They don't you don't even know how to reach them, right? So I think this is the sort of the thing that people get confused about, right? Because they were unable to look at the data paradigm, because data is so valuable, but they can't analyze it. They don't understand its power. And so they're willingly giving it away. And so to us, the metaverse is everything we do online, because everything we do online generates value in one form or the other. Now, if I do work online, then I have an employer, and the employer pays me money for my work online. And there's some value exchange that takes place. But when I work, or when I essentially use these social media platforms, or even when I play a game, I generate value, but that value is not shared with me. That value is basically given to the platforms or the game studios. And that's what Web3 changes. And so I think that everything we do in the metaverse is a place where we're getting our fair value through digital property rights.
But what about those teenagers that, or maybe the ones that, people at our age, let's say, we caught some natural vibes, right? We spend time in the nature and we know the vibe in the real world, let's say like that. But this generation, they will be absorbed by the metaverse environment like a storm. Like they literally have no chance to balance, because the impact is so high that is right there at your fingerprint to connect and spend the most of your time in the metaverse, in a virtual world. How do you see that?
So I don't agree with that view. I know some people say, oh, are we just all going to look like WALL-E, right? In the future, where we'll just basically not move around and just basically be sort of these big blobs on screens and on VR and basically just be online all the time. First of all, our human bodies aren't built this way, right? Outside of the health issues, we just generally won't feel good. And ultimately, we want to look at performance. So if you're, maybe the good example I can give is esports. A lot of people who are not in esports think to be really, really good at esports, which is playing video games at a competitive level, you don't need to be physical. But actually, the really good esports athletes are physical. They go to the gym, they have to do dexterity training, they have to have strong hand-eye coordination, because if you're physically not fit, then you're not mentally and physically able to compete at esports at the highest level. So it doesn't really matter if your activity is virtual or physical or mental, whatever it is. You still need to have a very strong physical and mental condition. And the way to do that is through exercise. So, and if that were true, if that were true that we would be fully absorbed by the metaverse, then why do we care about our diet today more than we ever did before? Why do we care about our health than ever before? Why are gyms popping up everywhere? Why are the brands of clothing wares that we buy sports related? Why are sneaker shoes selling more than ever before, like Nike, Adidas, Asics, right? Because they're health related and because they are about our lifestyles. And it's because the one thing that the online world and by definition the metaverse have done is they've educated us about our health. 20 years ago, we didn't know about diet that much. 20 years ago, we didn't understand about BMIs and about sort of how to keep healthy and fit and what it does to a mental state. And now we do, right? We have podcasts, we have education, we have audiobooks, we have videos that teach us about how to live a healthier lifestyle. And I think that's what's happening. Now, I do think, though, that the way that we keep healthy will be different. So, for instance, maybe in the past, we would be trying to run around outside and go to the woods, and we would definitely encourage that. But now a lot of people have machines at home, right? They have a treadmill, they have a Peloton, or they have weights, whatever they have it in their home, so they can do a quick workout as well and keep healthy in the confines of their home, or maybe into a gym or something like that. And while I wouldn't say that there's a right or wrong here, I would just say that the health conscious level goes up. But the way that we can do so has become more available. Like we have just way more options to stay healthy today than we had when I grew up, for instance.
Prior any metaverse investment, what's that key element that you look at to make the difference to deploy the money or not?
So for us, it's about mindset, the entrepreneur mindset. And when we think about the Web3 space, we think that the ones who will truly succeed understand the value of a shared network. So this is a bit different from Web2. In Web2, the winners have been people who are very strong at zero-sum thinking. Basically, how do I win? How do I take everything, right? Whereas in Web3, actually those guys who think that way tend to run into a lot of trouble, as we have seen lately. And so the main point in Web3 is how do you sort of build in a shared effect? Because to be really strong in Web3, you need to build with community. To build with community, you need to be able to sort of engage with the community and understand the community. And that means you can only do so, we believe, in which you can share value back. It's kind of also with the ethos of decentralization. It has to be almost a philosophical mindset to say, I agree that, by being more decentralized and by being more sharing to the community, I actually gain more value. I create more value by basically giving more to the community. This is not a typical way of thinking.
Okay, but how can you discover, literally, how can you discover that piece of skill in the founder mind at the starting point?
Well, you have to see how they build the community. For instance, does the community love them, and what have they done with the community? Those are actions you can see. And then also philosophically, when you talk to them, do they agree in this perspective? What do they think about what happens when, what are the projects they're building? Are they thinking about, what does the tokenomics look like, for instance, right? These are all elements that you can look at to understand whether they prioritize essentially a shared network that they're building, or maybe one that is maybe more centralized.
So by the time they look for founding, even at the seed stage, they should have had the community already.
Well, they should have the thinking around it, right? And they should be very clear about their approaches. Community, I would say, is something you can build well before you even raise money, because you're building a foundation of something at start. The community, the cost of building a community, as we know, is not very high, right? But I think maintaining the community and being able to know how to maintain them, actually, that's the effort part. And that, by the way, as I said, because it doesn't take money as much as it takes effort. If you're natural, then it's easy for you. If it's not natural for you, then you have to find a partner, or it's difficult for you. And then that would be harder for you, we think, to succeed in Web3 if you don't have that sort of shared community effect, at least when it comes to the leadership side of things.
And what do you do if you, the product itself, it is great, the idea fits the market, everything is amazing there, and then you go and see the community has 300,000 following on Twitter and 3 comments like fire, or something like that.
There are a few options.
How do you approach that project?
It depends on the opportunity spectrum, but if it's a really great opportunity and we think that the team might not be the right team, because sometimes we have to accept that people are great builders in terms of product, but maybe they're not great at community building. They need someone else to help them. So sometimes we try to engineer a sort of merger. We might find, hey, this company is really good at this and your company is really good at this. Maybe we can put them together. So maybe that's something we have done sometimes. The other thing is maybe we think we can do it. So then we acquire the company. So we've done quite a few acquisitions. Most recently we acquired a streaming platform called Azarus. But Sandbox was an acquisition, for instance, and TinyTab was an acquisition. And because we felt that there were gaps that we can support them to build into Web3. And so we would do acquisitions and M&A, for instance, as well. That's an alternative path too. But in most cases, we would try to encourage them to basically sort of build in the areas that they don't know, with either by hiring people or finding a co-founder, or finding a partner company that can help them do that. Because of course, it's not right to think that one entrepreneur can do everything. And so part of what we try to do is help them identify their gaps so that they can develop appropriately.
We are in the year 2040. Animoca is a $10 trillion company and you became the richest guy in the world. You wake up in the morning, day one, what do you want?
I certainly hope I won't become the richest man in the world. I think if I did, then something would have gone wrong in a sense. And I think just so you get an idea, Animoca Brands itself is a public company. which basically has a distribution of over 2,700 shareholders today. And no single shareholder, including myself, has any majority rights. In a sense that I could lose my job tomorrow if all the shareholders, or the majority of the shareholders, not even all the shareholders, think I do a bad job, right? So I'm not saying we're like a DAO, but effectively, we only have one class as common shares, no preference rights, no golden shares, none of that stuff. So my point on this one is that, I kind of act in the interest of our community and our shareholders. And I think to me, that's kind of the way that we think of the future in Web3. And so when you ask the question about what happens when I wake up as the sort of, I don't think of it in the sense of, having everything in the classic sense. I think of it more in the sense of, if the general space has evolved in this manner, then what I'll keep doing is supporting and evolving it. But I won't think of it in terms of, okay, I don't think there is such a thing as an end goal. I don't think there's such a thing of I think it's very unnatural to assume that we've hit the final point and we're just like, okay, I've hit it. And to me, there is a constant evolution of what we're doing in sort of, human society and creativity in the mind. And we're also at an age where with AI, for instance, and the advancements, we don't have the answers for the future. So what it means is there's going to be new things to resolve and new problems to evolve. And Web3 to me is a reaction to Web2, right? The evolution of blockchain may have started because of an abuse of a financial trust. But actually what Web3 is now doing is solving global trust issues around, our data, for instance. And that's, again, a reaction to what happened because of the abuses that Web2 took place. And so, I think of this as more as a constant evolution. I don't, it's hard for me to say what I do and wake up and when I
mean, maybe at one point you wake up and say, you know what, like I did it. Like if I look back, I really did it. And then who is Yat? Like you go and, brush your teeth in front of, in the bathroom, right? And you have this self-conversation when you actually did it. Like, who are you in that second?
Maybe I wouldn't say, maybe the question rather than who are you is maybe the mantra I would like to think of is that to not have or have as few regrets as possible, right? So it's not, I don't know that there's ever an end point. I don't think it's possible. For instance, I don't think I can ever retire because I think there's just too much to do. And I'm enjoying it, right? So it's not I know some people might feel like, oh, I've, and again, when we spoke earlier, we talked about money as a means to an end. A lot of people join finance because they have a dream to do something, but they need the money to get there. So they join finance to make the money, and then they become a baker or they open a restaurant. And maybe that's their dream, and that's great. And they want to be known for that stuff, and that's okay. I think the same is for myself, evolving sort of and having created a sort of a society that is driven by impact and purpose is a goal that I don't think can ever be fully achieved, right? It's a constant evolution. But I want to be able to say that I've continuously developed into that space and that I sort of lived a life with as few regrets as possible. Basically being able to do what I wanted to do to push things forward. I don't think there is I don't think there's an end point though.
Is there any project that you wanted to be part of and you miss it?
Oh, any project? No, I mean, there's many projects out there that I thought that, would be awesome for me to be involved. But I think, so if it's a sense of, I wish I could be involved, yeah, or I wish I could have met this person before he died or something, sure, right? There's many moments in life where you think that, if I had the chance, but you don't, right? And I think, to me, that's just a fleeting moment of, okay, well, let's move on. Because, as an entrepreneur, I think the biggest thing that entrepreneurs do for the world is they shape a future, right? They kind of make the future they want to see. And that's certainly what we're doing. We're trying to make the future we want to see, and we may or may not be successful, but at least we can say we tried, right? And, where we are with Animoca Brands, that evolution really came from decades of experience between myself and the team of, frankly, all the failures and the problems and the issues that we've learned over the decades of running businesses online and elsewhere to being able to navigate the space right now, and there's still failures and there's still problems and there's still issues that happen every day that, it doesn't run smoothly. When FTX happened, it was problems, right? When 3 hours happened, it was problems. When interest rates increased, there were problems. I mean, like all these macro factors affect everything on a sort of multidimensional way that is hard to sort of forecast and plan for. And yet we still sort of, continue to invest and continue to grow because we're a little bit smarter and a little bit wiser than we were, say, a few decades ago, right? So the collective experience and the collective failures and maybe, the things you wished you did help shape who you are today. So again, I don't view it as I wish I did it, because they're just lessons. I think really the right way to look at it from our perspective is these are just lessons of our life that then help us make better decisions in the future.
How expensive will be a failure for you at this level?
Expensive.
Like not only financially, but let's say for your company. Like if you fail with the project, like it will be.
I think
like a lot of weight behind, or just a matter of moving forward. Okay, it's part of the game.
No. So the one thing that is very important to us is that we follow things with a care of duty. So projects will fail. It happens all the time because life is a series of failures that you learn from. But it's not actually the failure itself that defines you. It's what you make of the failure. So for instance, in a personal failure, I would say, what lessons did you learn? How did you grow from it? As an employee who made a mistake, what did you learn from it? How did you evolve from that so next time you can be better? That's on an individual level. If it's on a project level, then what happened with the people who were affected by the failure? How did you take care of it? What did you manage? There's restrictions. Maybe there's not that much money, or maybe there's not whatever. How did you deal with the failure such that you think that not only can you sleep okay at night, but also you think you've done as good as you can within the means available to you to sort of resolve the situation. That to me is the test. The test isn't the fact that it's failed, because we experiment with ideas, we do things. And the same, by the way, is with entrepreneurs. We have invested in entrepreneurs that have failed many times, right? Just because you failed actually doesn't mean that you're not worth investing. In fact, sometimes if you fail many times, you have many lessons. And you see this in Silicon Valley a lot, where these entrepreneurs consistently get money because, people understand that they've got some valuable lessons. But the reason people continue to reinvest or support them is not because they just failed. It's because after the failure, or during the failure, they tried to do their best to reconstitute or to do the right thing or to manage it through very difficult, stressful times, whatever that may be. And that to me is, I think, is a defining feature.
As a leader, do you encourage your people to be right there at the edge all the time? Like, to me, the way how you come in front of that mistake, the intention behind, expresses everything, right? Because if you come with a good intention and the end result it's a mistake, that's not a problem. Like, let's do it, keep doing it, because we are keep learning, right?
Yes.
But if you come with different thoughts in mind and obviously the result is a mistake, then it's a totally different story, right?
I agree with you that the intentions is really important. But I think one of the difference about as you grow as an organization is your collective, when you talk about sort of a sense of duty and a sense of care, the collective responsibility that you carry is now bigger than just you. So for instance, it's kind of like when you think of investing money. If you invest your own money, go as risky as you want. Who cares? I mean, sure, it's not great if you lose money, but it's your money. So you're only accountable to yourself. But when you start investing third-party funds, if you're responsible for other people's money, then you gave them a parameter. You said, I will do it this way, and I am being transparent about the way that I invest. Then in some ways, you are restricting yourself because you gave a kind of commitment or a sense of duty as to making these investments, which also means, by the way, you might miss out on opportunities because you created a framework that was your sense of care as to, how you would invest, for instance, which happens very frequently. And I think the same is true for us as an organization. The Animoca of 5 years ago or 6 years ago was much smaller. And so we take very different type of bets, which, back then people might say, I mean, that seemed crazy that we would go into NFTs in 2017, 2018, right?
Yeah.
But if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be the company that we were today. But today, for instance, while of course we are bigger and we have more capital and we can deploy more, the way that we deploy, for instance, and the way that we support projects have to bear in mind the fact that we are now also responsible more than just for ourselves, but also to our community, which is bigger, and by extension, to the Web3 ecosystem. We have a more collective responsibility as well. And so we have to be in some ways more cautious. And that's why we have a management team and we have a board and we have XCOM. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Do you think it was a matter of, the percentage behind this massive success? It's a matter of coming in this market at the right time?
Well, for sure, the conviction was important. And of course, being early always has, when we say impact and purpose, we try to get early into an industry because that's actually when you have the biggest impact. Because that's actually when, you can have the biggest impact with a relatively small amount of capital. Whereas, someone can still have a very big impact in Web3 or very big impact in AI today, but you have to deploy much more capital to have that impact, right? So for us as an organization, we were typically always very early, and that's been our culture. When I started building an ISP back in the early 90s in Hong Kong, that was very early, and you could argue maybe too early, but it still provided me the lessons about what the internet was about in the early 90s that then gave me some opportunities going forward.
How would you invest right now $10,000 in the industry?
Well, this is not financial advice.
Yes, absolutely.
Of course.
It's just a matter of fun.
It's just a matter of fun, right? So I think the main thing I would say, the way I invest, maybe this is the best way to explain it. I was a prolific angel investor before sort of going into Web3 and sort of taking that investment style a little bit into Animoca Brands, was that I would only myself, and again, this is not a professional investor approach. A professional investor approach, which is what we now do in the fund side, takes different views on this one. But if it's personal money, then I think of it almost like a education check. When I invested, I invested over 70 angel investments. For me, I invested in things that I was passionate about. Because through passion, I have interest, I have feelings for these things. And that's actually how you learn. Like, you can't learn and you can't grow and be interested in something if you don't feel for it, right? I think people can tell that we're passionate about digital property rights and we care about sort of data sovereignty. And that's why we can not just invest, but we can really study it and think deeply and add value to it. If we're just investing to make money, then that's fine, but you won't learn from it. The only thing you care about is your yield and how much you derive from it. And the value that I generated from all my angel investments, which have given me returns, did not actually come from the pure financial return. It came from the knowledge that I gained by having made these investments and studying about them, that to me was infinitely more valuable than any kind of MBA or PhD I could have taken. Now, imagine instead of, and again, I'm not suggesting people don't do their MBA or their PhD. If that's what you want to do, please do ahead. But imagine you take that money that would cost you in school fees for your bachelor and your master's degree. In America, that's $500,000. It's about it, depending which school you go to, right? But it's a lot of money. And instead, you put that money into investing in things that you love and care about, maybe even in your future career, and you learn from that approach. You might make money, but you will learn, I think, a lot more by being involved in the businesses and supporting them, which you've given these early startup checks in the industries that you want to develop into. So that's kind of the mental model that I took off with angel investing, and it served me well both financially and intellectually.
That's just a beautiful way of saying everything about how we should, see the entire self-development game at the end, right? Because it's about you versus you.
It's an
every
investment
day.
in yourself.
Yeah.
It's always an investment in yourself. It's just how
Yeah.
you choose to invest in it.
I just want to thank you 1,000 times again for coming today, and I'm super grateful. Obviously, we are so happy with builders like you in the space, the impact you have, and we always have something to learn. And again, thank you so much for coming today, and appreciate everything.
Thank you for having me.
So guys, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Please drop me a comment below. Tell us how we did it. If you consider to subscribe if you liked, and please follow us on major platforms, social media, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Iron Capital News. And thank you so much for watching, and see you on the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you.